So sometimes people ask me places to go on the internet to find information on early Buddhism or secular Buddhism, or the kinds of topics that I'm talking about here on the channel. So on today's video, I'll give you some suggestions, coming right up. I'm Doug Smith. I'm study director at the Secular Buddhist Association. That's secularbuddhism.org. If you're new to the channel and interested in living a wiser and a kinder and a calmer life, consider subscribing. So finding information out on the internet, as I think, something that we can all learn how to do and learn how to do better. The main problem, as many of us will know, with the internet is that not all of the information on it is reliable and responsible. And so part of what I'm going to be doing here is to try to tease out for you some reliable and responsible kinds of places to find information. But I think we have to keep in the back of our minds that notion of reliability and responsibility when we go to the internet for anything, whether it be early Buddhism, whether it be medical advice, anything. And so, I mean, on the larger scale, we have to think of where we're going to look for responsible advice. From whom are we going to find that advice? So it's not enough just to go on the internet and do a Google search for something and take the first thing that comes up, especially with a very kind of niche, specialized kind of search as in early Buddhism, because there's a lot of, shall we say, sketchy advice out there, or sketchy information that isn't from people who really know the material very well. So with that in mind, let's move forward. I'll just begin with a quick word about Wikipedia. A lot of people will badmouth Wikipedia and say that the material in Wikipedia is not great, and particularly on very, very niche topics like, let's say, issues in early Buddhism. Some of it is not great. So we have to work with Wikipedia with a bit of let's say, grains of salt. Take the information on Wikipedia with a grain of salt. Try to, if there's something on Wikipedia that you don't understand or that you find questionable, or in fact anything that you've never heard before, you should always try to back it up with their sources by going into the bottom of Wikipedia if there's a link. In other words, if they make a claim and there's a link to the claim, check out the link and make sure that the link looks to you responsible and that it actually supports the point that's being made. That's one thing you can do with Wikipedia. I will say personally that I like Wikipedia. Now, part of that may be that I can see through some of the problems pretty quickly and just discount those. But in any event, there's a lot of good material there in general on let's say, Buddhism, on most topics, really. And so I do think that it is a place to start when you have a question. But you have to understand that there's many different aspects of Buddhism. And so if what you're interested in is, let's say, early Buddhism, which is my interest in particular mostly, then reading about some other school of Buddhism, reading about their take on that particular topic may be completely at odds with what is being taught in early Buddhism from the early texts. So you have to be aware of that problem. So you have to check the Wikipedia entry to see where it's, what it's actually talking about. Now, moving on from Wikipedia, which is a general source, a more specific source, a great source for looking things up is the website called Access to Insight. Access to Insight is basically, it's a whole bunch of different articles written around a large source of primary source material, which is the text from the Pali Canon. Pali Canon are the texts that we rely upon for early Buddhism, those plus their counterparts in other languages, the only complete counterpart being in Chinese, and then their fragmentary counterparts in Sanskrit and some other languages, related languages. But that's on Access to Insight. You're going to get the Pali Canon, and a translation, mostly translation by Thanissaro Bhikkhu, who is a Western monastic. And also you're going to get articles. Now, let's distinguish primary and secondary source material for those of you who aren't familiar. Primary source material is basically the farthest we can go if we're doing a deep search. Once we do the deep search, let's say for early Buddhism, the farthest we're going to go is to find the material from the Pali Canon. And again, related material. And let's say, other archaeological remains, those kinds of things. That's the primary source. The secondary source then are articles written about that. So let's say if I was writing, what I'm doing here is sort of secondary source material. It's taking that primary source material and interpreting it. And so on Access to Insight, you'll find some secondary sources, that is to say, articles written by Thanissaro Bhikkhu and others about these texts, which are wonderful, many of them. And so that is also, and one of the great things about Access to Insight is that it includes a detailed kind of index of topics. So you can look up a topic in early Buddhism. And we have to remember, though, that Thanissaro Bhikkhu is a traditional Theravada monastic, and so to an extent his interpretation of these texts is going to be colored by some of the Theravada commentaries. So to that extent, I wouldn't say a pure early Buddhist, he's more of an early Buddhist who is looking at the material through a certain kind of commentarial tradition. Nevertheless, he is generally pretty good. I think his translations can be problematic at times. One famous example is that he translates dukkha, which is usually understood to mean pain or the unsatisfactory nature of our experience. He translates that word with stress. And so everywhere you'll see stress in his texts, that's the word dukkha that he's translating. And that's an example of where Thanissaro's translation tendencies are a little bit outside the mainstream and perhaps a little bit clunky, in my opinion. Nevertheless, it's a good place to start. I think a better source of the early texts and translations is at Sutta Central. Sutta Central is a website that's run by Bhikkhu Sujato. Bhikkhu Sujato is another Western monk who does a lot of the translations himself, just as Thanissaro does. And they're going to have, any translator is going to have his or her own quirks. In my opinion, Bhikkhu Sujato's translations are better than those of Thanissaro. And so when you go to that website and find Sujato's translations, I think you're going to find better ones. They read better to me. I think they're a little bit more accurate, at least to my understanding of the early texts. The website also includes a lot of functionality that allows you to sort of look up the Pali, corresponding Pali words for English words. And that can be very helpful if you really want to geek out on that early material, which most of us don't want to do, but in any event, that's an option for you. I should also mention that both of those websites don't only include translations by their primary translator. They do include translations by other people who are often quite good. There are a number of translations by Bhikkhu Bodhi on Sutta Central. Bhikkhu Bodhi is the person who does most of the translations for wisdom. That is the hardbound, the snail mail, if you like, the physical books that wisdom puts out. And Bhikkhu Bodhi is arguably the leading translator of the early material into English right now. He's a wonderful translator, a very careful translator, and a very good scholar of the early material. Sutta Central also has a wonderful forum on Buddhism that's pitched towards early Buddhism. That's sort of the interest of Bhikkhu Sujato. I should say Bhikkhu Sujato is also a Theravada monastic, although he describes himself, I've seen him describe himself online, as not really a Theravadan, as more a practitioner of early Buddhism. That is to say, he really takes the early texts particularly seriously as their own thing, as something that exists underneath the stratum of commentaries. And so to that extent, he's sort of more interested, I think, in the early material for its own sake. So, but if you're looking for a discussion forum of that early material, I think the Sutta Central forum is wonderful. I do check up on them from time to time, and sometimes the discussions on there will spur some idea in my mind that I will then go and do a video about. So they can be a source of video ideas for me. They can probably be a source of discussion for you. The only thing that I would keep in the forefront of your mind if you're going to a discussion forum is to avoid arguments and disputes. This is a key part of the Buddha's own advice in many places in the canon, but certainly in his early discourses in the Sutta Nipata. And it's something that we always are prone to get drawn into when we are on a discussion forum, because discussion forums have, I think, a Janus-faced, a dual nature to them. On the one hand, they can be some of the greatest sources of material and of discussion, deep discussion of texts that you're going to find anywhere, where people with real knowledge, of whom there are quite a few over on Sutta Central, get into really deep and edifying discussions of all manner of subjects in early Buddhism and other forms of Buddhism, frankly. But the other side of that coin, the other side of that Janus face, is that it tends to foment arguments and disputes. It's part of the nature of a discussion forum like that. People get ordinarily attached to their own position. Whenever you're in a discussion with somebody else and they push back on you, the immediate human response is one of defensiveness and one of wanting to defend your position. And sometimes people that you will meet online, even though they may be very nice in person, may be somewhat short in their online discussions, and there also are other people, let's say, online who are not so nice. And all of these people can make discussion problematic. So I would suggest, if you're going to use a discussion forum, that you do so with care. Nevertheless, that's a good one. I should also say that there is a difference between Thanissaro and Sujato's approaches, in the sense that Thanissaro is more of a traditional Theravada monastic in the sense of being conservative. And Sujato is less of one in the sense of being more liberal and open. And in particular, that resolves itself, let's say, in the issue of the Bhikkhuni Sangha, the potential of restarting the nuns, the monastic order of nuns within the Theravada school, where Thanissaro doesn't believe it's possible because the rules don't allow it. And Sujato tends to follow Analayo's view, at least as I understand it, that there's no reason not to restart the women's Sangha, the nuns' Sangha in the Theravada school. That's only one example out of many, but what I'm saying is that if you follow Sujato, it's going to be a more sort of a liberal, shall we say, somewhat left wing of center rather than a right wing of center that you're going to find over with Thanissaro's material. If you're looking for a great source, a sort of a blog source of material on what's going on right now in Western Buddhism and Buddhism in the United States in particular, but in all forms, I would say, of contemporary Buddhism, then the blog put out by my good friend Justin Whittaker, American Buddhist Perspectives, is just wonderful. I think if you search for Buddhist blog on the internet, I remember checking this a while ago, his is like number one. I mean, he does an amazing job of keeping up with all of the trends in Buddhism and sort of giving them all the discussion, an open discussion. Justin's take is very much in favor of a progressive sort of Buddhism that is looking to the future rather than to the past. And so to that extent, his take on things is a progressive take. Just so you know, I mean, that's, I think, something that you're going to find pretty quickly on his blog. I should also say that he's taken on a couple of new jobs, or different jobs. He's got different jobs all the time. And so I hope and expect that by the time this video comes out, his blog will still be active. But if it isn't, just keep an eye out for his work, because he's wonderful, whether he's writing for them, for his own blog or for whoever. I should also mention the various famous Buddhist periodicals, that is Tricycle and Lion's Roar and Buddha Dharma. Those are probably the most famous. They come out in snail mail form, in physical form, but they also have websites. They also have associated websites where you can get I believe all the material you can get in the magazine you can get on their website. So to that extent, I include them in this video because they are web-based places that we can find information about Buddhism. Now, this video is really about early Buddhism, and that's where we have to have the caveat here, which is that in my experience, there's a lot of misinformation on sources like those, like Tricycle, like Lion's Roar, like Buddha Dharma. Buddha Dharma, I think, is I don't know as well. It's a little bit more focused in their articles, but at least in the other two, there's a lot of misinformation. And so I think one has to be careful, because they're coming at it with a lot of people who are not scholars of the early material, who have a sort of a passing understanding of it, or an understanding of it from a very modern perspective that's not really informed by scholarship. And so you can get some misinformation there. They also, though, do have some articles written by true scholars of early material, and so you have to sort of pick and choose. Bhikkhu Bodhi, for example, does write articles now and then for both publications. Bhikkhu Bodhi would be a wonderful, in general, a very good propounder of the material from early Buddhism. From a generally a Theravada perspective, of course, he's a Theravada monastic. Theravadins are the Buddhist order most interested in early Buddhism, although Bhikkhu Bodhi is somebody who knows the early material very well. Another scholar that you'll run into from time to time in those magazines is Andrew Olenski. Andy is a scholar of the early material. He has a doctorate in Buddhist studies, and his study was on the early material. So if you read an article by Andy Olenski, it will usually be focused on the early material, and his take is really wonderful. He's one of my teachers. I've taken many courses from him, and I like him as a person, and I like him as a teacher. He has recently, in the last couple of years, started up something called the Integrated Dharma Institute, which is a website that he runs that has, at the moment, at the time of this recording, 1 year-long course that he's selling in 3 parts. And it's a wonderful course. It's a course that is mostly textual, in the sense that he has a number of texts that he has prepared every week or every couple of weeks, with material from the Pali Canon and his sort of exegesis of that material, plus some comments on the Pali, and he'll have himself reading the Pali in an audio file, and occasional videos of him giving Dharma talks, but very occasional. And it's a wonderful resource if you want to do that kind of thing, where it's scheduled every certain amount of time and you get a couple of readings, but it's not a website that you can sort of go to for reference per se. There are also a number of modern teachers who have material online, a significant amount of material online, who are interested in early Buddhism, and in particular in early Buddhism from a secular kind of understanding or perspective, such as Bodhipaksha, who runs Wild Mind. It's a wonderful site. He also produces those articles on fake Buddha quotes. So he's got a sense of humor. It's a great place to look. There's also Kinchino Weber, who does work also in England. He has material online that's worth reading. Also Lee Brasington. Lee Brasington is probably one of the leading experts on jhana, on the practice of jhana and teaching jhana in classes, in retreats. He has a wonderful website with a lot of material. There's also a lot of material at the Secular Buddhist Association website. That's secularbuddhism.org. At the moment that I'm making this video, the website is sort of having trouble. I mean, you can access the material, but it's having trouble, so as a result, there's not a whole lot of updates going on there right now. Anyway, a lot of my old articles are still there, and I was writing about these same topics before I started making the videos. That's a good place. I would say the deepest place for study on the internet of early Buddhism would be the coursework, massive coursework put out by Bhikkhu Bodhi. Bhikkhu Bodhi, as I mentioned, is the leading translator of the early material into English. He has put out an audio section of audio courses, that is to say, they're tapes of his lectures. He put them out in there. I believe they're hosted in the monastery of which he's a part. I'll try to link those down below. You may have to search around the site for them, but in any event, they're there. He also, subsequent to that, has made a lot of video lectures for YouTube on similar subjects. He has an enormous body of these lectures teaching about let's say, the Majjhima Nikaya, one of the books of the Pali Canon, and other books and other parts of the canon. It's a really deep dive, so you have to be prepared for that. He's a real scholar. He goes through the suttas almost line by line. His style is relatively dry and relatively detailed, so it's something you have to be prepared for. But if that's what you're looking for, he will give you an amazing deep course in early Buddhism, or the ideas of early Buddhism, in what will end up being scores or even hundreds of hours of teaching material. Now, I'm sure that there are many sources of early or secular material on the web that I've left out. And so if you know of any that you think are good and responsible and thorough, then put the links to them down below in the comments. I'd be really interested to know. Maybe I'll learn something new. I always love finding new places where I can get material, because that's, it's a way of sort of recharging your batteries to find a new site like that. So if this has been useful to you, consider sharing it around to your friends. Send links to other people if you enjoyed this video. Consider subscribing. Give it a thumbs up. And if you want to help support the work, check out my Patreon page. It's linked down below. So thanks so much, and I hope we'll catch you on the next one of these videos. And meanwhile, spend time looking, but also be well.